All right, so we've already created some two-way tables previously. So now we're going to look at relative frequencies. So here I have a sample two-way table. Remember that a two-way table shows data that relates to two different categories. So our example here is where we asked students about whether they took a foreign language or not and whether they played a sport or not. So the data from 50 students is shown in the following two-way table. The students were asked whether or not they were taking a foreign language and whether or not they were taking a sport, and we got the following data. So we're going to be looking at something called the relative frequency for this data. So the relative frequency is the ratio of the value of a subtotal to the value of the total. So we're going to go ahead and set up our table here. Let me make it just a little bit smaller. Here we go. And so what I mean by that is a ratio. We're going to take our total number, which is 50, and it is going to be our denominator in each of these cases. So we're going to have 14 divided by 50. This is going to end up being 28. When we do that division, it's going to be 0.28, but we're going to want to see that as a percentage. So when we multiply 0.28 by 100 to get the percentage, we get 28%. So this 28% is the number of students, or the percentage of students that play a sport and take a foreign language. Here we have do not play a sport and take a foreign language. We're still going to have everything over 50. Here it's going to be 23 over 50 because that's our number from up here. And then when I do that, I get 0.46. And I multiply by that by 100 to get my percentage, which is 46%. I'm going to stick inside here for a minute and do all the ones inside. These are called our joint relative frequencies. So these are the ones that are on the inside of my relative frequency table. So here again, everything is over 50. This happens to be 10 over 50. And that's going to give me 0.2. When I multiply that by 100, I get 20%. And one more time for that last joint frequency is going to be 3 over 50. And that's going to give me 0.06. Multiply that by 100 and I get 6%. So this is what we call our joint relative frequencies. So let me do a little highlight here. So these are called my joint relative frequencies. So let's do this. Make a little key over here. So these are our joint relative frequencies. Now, the ones on the outside also have a name. Let's just do that in a different color. Let's make those pinks just so we can see the difference. So we're going to do the same thing. It's still over 50. And I'm going to take my total. Really, this is the total number of students that take a foreign language. So 37 divided by 50 is going to be 74. Actually 0.74, got ahead of myself, times 100, that gives me 74%. You're going to see that there is a correlation here. If I add 28% to 46%, I do get 74%. So these relative frequency totals over here, and we'll give it its name in a minute, is really the addition of the ones to the other side. So they're fairly easy to make sure that you have correct. So here I'm going to do 13 over 50, and this gives me 0.26 times 100 gives me 26%. And you're going to notice 20% plus 6% is 26%. So this is all of the students that do not take a foreign language. And obviously, we can do the same thing with the columns. So this would be the column of everyone who played a sport. So that was 24 over 50, over the total. And if I do that division, 24 divided by 50, I get 0.48 times 100 is 48%. You'll also notice that 28% plus 20% is 48%, as you would expect, because we're all relative to the total. So here I am going to have 26 divided by 50. When I do that math, I'm going to go ahead and get 0.52. When I do that, multiply that by 100, I get 52%. You're going to notice 48%, actually 46% and 6% equals 52%. So this whole column adds up like you would expect. And then if I go across, 48% plus 52% is going to be 100, because 50 divided by 50 is going to be 1. 1 times 100 is going to give us 100%. So when I talk about these outer pieces, so let's get a little bit of a highlight going here. Let's do a different color than the green. Let's do this pink. So these outside here have a specific name to them. So here that would be our rows. And this would be our column totals. And those two together have a name called the marginal relative frequencies. So let's go ahead and put that there. And then we're going to call these are our marginal relative frequencies. Way to remember that is the margins on your paper are on the outside. So marginal frequencies are those outside numbers in your relative frequency table. So we're just looking at these to answer questions, so to be able to analyze the data from a different perspective. So there is also something called a conditional frequency, and we're going to see that being asked in a different way in this example question. It says, what is the relative frequency of students that take a foreign language and play a sport to all students taking a foreign language? So there's two pieces to this. So remember, when we talk about there being a ratio, we're always looking for that 2 to tell us what's the numerator and what's the denominator. So this is going to be what we call a conditional relative frequency. And what I'm looking for here is I'm not going to be comparing it to the complete total. Here I'm going to be comparing it to whatever comes after 2. In this case, it's all students taking a foreign language. Well, all students taking a foreign language is 37. So it's not based on the total, it's based on this condition, all students taking a foreign language. Now, what is the relative frequency of students that take a foreign language and play a sport? So play a sport and take a foreign language, that's going to be 14. So now I have to do a little bit of math. So 14 divided by 37 is going to give me 0.378, and then it has another 3 out here, but that would leave that as an 8. So we're just going to go ahead and truncate it there. So then I'm going to multiply that by 100, and I get 37.8%. So this is very different than this 28%. This 28% here is based on the total. This conditional relative frequency is based on the fact that we're asking only in relationship to those people who are taking a foreign language, and there's only 37 people, 37 students taking a foreign language. So you could be asked some additional questions as well. Not meaning to move the whole thing here. What is the relative frequency of students that neither play a sport nor take a foreign language to all students that do not play a sport? So we're looking for a total of, so there's my 2. So that's going to be where I'm looking to find my denominator, all students that do not play a sport. So all students that do not play a sport. So that was a total of 26 students did not play a sport. So that's going to be my denominator. And then I'm going to look for my numerator. So you want to know the relative frequency. So this is my conditional relative frequency that neither play a sport nor take a foreign language. So I'm going to go ahead and look. They neither play a sport. 2, they do not take a foreign language, and that was only 3. So that's going to be 3 out of 26. And so when I do that math, 3 divided by 26 is 0.115, and then it goes to 3, so I'm just going to leave it with the 3 decimal places. When I multiply that by 100, I get 11.5%. So 11.5% is our conditional relative frequency, where we're comparing the relative frequency of students that neither play a sport nor take a foreign language to all students that do not play a sport. And that is the 3 different kinds of relative frequencies that you would find when analyzing a two-way table.